It was so paralyzing. I couldn't do anything because anything I thought about doing had to have a plausible story on how it could be bigger than human interest. It's definitely intoxicating to be around successful people. I do wonder if sometimes the attitude of thinking of yourself as a successful person kind of kills the magic that makes you successful. The problem is if you only do things that from the outset seem like they can be billion-dollar ideas, you eliminate a lot of good ideas and you restrict yourself to the sort of things that everyone else is doing. I'm Paul Sawaya, the founder and CEO of Elsewhere. Elsewhere is it's a game studio and a game. We like to think of ourselves as a new kind of game studio making a new kind of game. Specifically, we're making a multiplayer roguelike game. It's this genre of game called roguelikes that goes back to the 70s, actually. But in recent years, in the past 10 years, has really kind of blown up. It's kind of seen this revitalization. What makes a roguelike is every time you play the game, it's different. And whenever you lose the game, you die for real. And that you start over at the beginning of a new game. So the way you play these games ends up being in these kind of short runs, they're called. Maybe a run is 30 or 60 minutes, and it's never the same run twice. And structuring a game this way, it's sort of like an exciting new way to look at video games. In some ways, it's like a return back to the arcade in a way, because it lets you kind of experience the game in these like short bursts and keep coming back for more, because there's lots of diversity in each run, right? Because there's this procedural generation component, each run is different. So it ends up being less of a one-off experience and more of an ongoing thing. And I was playing these roguelikes, especially over the pandemic. I played a lot of them and I got hooked on them. And I thought, man, someone should really make a game like this that you can play with your friends, and a game like this that's continuously updated, because the whole idea of this game is that it's different every time you play. And if you add other people to it, and if you add new surprises to it, it would be kind of this like really, I think, amazing, intoxicating thing, and it's something that didn't exist. So I kind of went back to the fact that I wanted to make video games when I was a kid. It's like, maybe I can make one. And here we are.
When did you leave human interest?
I left, it was very poorly timed. I left Human Interest in May of 2020, thinking I was going to take a year off to travel, like right in the start of lockdown.
And what did you do that year, May 2020, after you left?
I hung out with you, Juwan.
That's true.
Yeah, I worked with Juwan and Gotti to invest in startups. I did a little bit of travel. I worked on some side projects, and yeah, started dreaming about my next thing, I guess.
And when did you start the next thing?
Well, it's sort of like, it's hard to say. I mean, Elsewhere, in its first form, actually started like right after I left Human Interest, this little side project for me and my friends to hang out online during lockdown. One of the first things we had was the name Elsewhere, and it was sort of like a 16-bit pixel game that you could use in the browser that had video chat in it. But it wasn't until fall of 2022 that I really started thinking about making a roguelike. And it wasn't until honestly, a year later, in late 2023, that I found the right team to do it with.
Do you want to talk about that, finding the right team, that process?
In some ways, what I learned from startups was more applicable than I thought, where at first I thought I needed to hire folks who had experience in the games industry. I was still coming off, my most recent professional experience was Human Interest. And when I left that company, it was 150 people. And we had already gotten to the phase where we were bringing in experienced people to run things. So going from that to the early stages of something new, I think I was maybe a little primed to think I should also bring in experienced folks. And it turns out what I really needed was what we had in the early days of Human Interest, which were like really passionate, hungry folks who had like lots of potential. And we built this team in a very short amount of time, over 2 months, mostly trying to like sell people on the vision and bringing them on at first as contractors, just to see if like, does this even make sense? Would you even want to do this? Do we work well together? And now we have a team that works exceptionally well together. In some ways, we're kind of like this underdog, kind of misfit team, because no one on our team has really like worked at a major games company. Nico has shipped a game before or two. Rebecca has created a game as an immersive real-life experience. If you look at other game startups, they have people on the team from like Riot and Blizzard, and we have none of that. We just have like a lot of guts, and a lot of enthusiasm about games as a medium and an art form.
Why are you so good at getting people on board? What's the secret?
There are a lot of game studios out there that are game startups out there trying to hire game developers, and a lot of times they're looking for people who worked at the two companies you keep hearing are Riot and Blizzard, because those are the two kind of big success stories in games. Riot especially is venture backed, right, and made League of Legends and Valorant, so that's kind of considered the entrepreneurial games company. And a lot of Riot alums have left to start their own games companies. But a lot of these Riot alums, they kind of have, I don't want to be rude, but they have, like, people call it Stanford syndrome, which is, you're a graduate from Stanford, everyone knows you're amazing, and you just have opportunities flung at you left and right. And so it's kind of hard to really get them excited about one thing because they have so many opportunities. I've talked to folks from Riot, and maybe someday we'll be lucky enough to have one on the team. But I think before we do that, we need people who are believers at the earliest stage. That requires a different kind of person. Another thing I've noticed everyone on the team has in common, and I wasn't looking for this explicitly, but I now realize it's very important, is everyone on the team has done something successful either on their own or a small team. Right? Rebecca ran her own company, Finn had his own side project, Nicola had his own side project, and Nico worked on a game with like a handful, like a small 5-person team. And a lot of the folks from companies like Riot know how to function well on like a 50-person team, and they're very deep specialists, but they're maybe not really good generalists. And we need enthusiastic generalists. I think that's what's made this team so special. Like, you could just like honestly hang out with us and see like the way it feels. Like, morale is so high and everything just works. Yeah, everyone works so well together. It's like the biggest pleasure coming to work with. We're still so far out from success, but it feels like we can succeed. It feels like we're winning, and it feels like we have a plan. And I think that's why everyone is so jazzed right now.
What makes you feel that way?
Well, we came out and set out to do something really hard. We set out to build a great demo of our game in 3 months from scratch, really. And that's not something that's really done in games. Usually games stay in kind of this really rough, kind of ugly prototype phase, sometimes for years, until you kind of find the fun. And we chose a very different path. We chose to build something polished but small, so that we could show it to people and basically demonstrate, A, that we know what we're doing, and also so that we could kind of look ourselves in the mirror and know that we know what we're doing too. It's really easy to leave things to the end of development and then you just never get to them, or they take, development takes much longer than you thought. So in 3 months, we went from like a bunch of ideas and Notion to something I can show people and they can play. It's not something that we could put on Steam and sell. It's not a complete game, but it is something that is genuinely impressive, especially for the time put in. And it also, within it, answers a lot of questions about what is our visual style going to be, what are our camera and controls going to be, right? What is our aesthetic? What is the overall feel of the game? All of that is figured out by creating a polished 3-month prototype. That has worked so well. I think I just want to do it again. We're going to start another 3-month or so sprint.
What will that lead to?
Well, the biggest point of feedback I got from people when I showed them the demo, the 3-month demo during GDC, was this is a very well-made indie game demo inspired by Hades, but what's the differentiation? Hades is obviously a big inspiration for us. I would argue the game has as much Dead Cells in it as Hades. Maybe it more immediately looks like Hades because it's isometric, but the combat system is very Dead Cells inspired. But even then, a lot of folks have noticed the same things we have, and they're coming to market with multiplayer roguelikes, in some cases co-op roguelikes. So what we need to do is obviously faithfully capture what made games like Hades and Dead Cells special, but also be creative and original and expand on what those titles did. We need to innovate, basically. We have a bunch of ideas of how we can improve on the formula of those games in a way that other folks won't. We as a company have chosen to be very transparent, to the point of, obviously, here I am on camera. We want to put pre-alpha builds of the game online, knowing that the actual game may look nothing like them, just so we can start building a fan base and start getting feedback. This is the one thing that startup founders understand that I think I wish more game creators would, which is the way to get something simple and basic into people's hands and get feedback and iterate with them in a way that I think that the games industry just hasn't really cottoned on to. It really is still very much in the Hollywood kind of big splash launch mindset where you almost want your game to be a secret before it comes out. There's one game startup I know that is trying to do this, but they actually ask everyone who playtests the game to sign an NDA, promising they won't tweet about it because they don't want people to talk about it until it's ready. And for me, it seems completely bonkers to tell people to not talk about your product. I would love for people to tweet about Elsewhere. Please, tweet every screenshot you want, and if people come to us and say, oh, this looks really basic and this doesn't look very interesting, it looks very early, and I'll say, you're right, it is basic and early. Join the Discord and watch this game unfold. And I think that's just better for everyone because you get to see what we're doing and we get to learn from you.
I do want to talk about you deciding to build video games. Was that hard for you to make the transition? You had to completely change your identity too.
I think you hit on the hard part, which is changing my identity. I mean, actually deciding to make video games in some ways was easy. My heart wanted. But I think after leaving Human Interest, for a brief moment, I was like a person who could be taken seriously. I'd started this billion-dollar fintech company, and I was offered an EIR job at one of the top venture firms in Silicon Valley, and I did that for a while and realized it wasn't for me. And I was being invited to these kind of private dinners and these kind of spaces where serious business people and famous millionaires and billionaires hung out, and I was kind of like maybe one foot into that world. It's definitely intoxicating to be around successful people. I do wonder if sometimes the attitude of thinking of yourself as a successful person kind of kills the magic that makes you successful. At any rate, I reached a point pretty quickly where I felt like the things that I would do to get myself taken seriously weren't the things I wanted to do, and weren't even necessarily good ideas. Like, early on, Elsewhere was a crypto Web3 thing, and I thought, well, I want to do something in games. Crypto and Web3 is the future, according to every startup founder and venture capitalist, so I'll just do that, and it'll let me get a little taste of what I want. It's funny, the voice in my head was like, this is responsible. We should be responsible and have a thesis on the market and look at the current technical inflections, and we're at an inflection point for Web3, and inflections are where great companies are built, right? You need a wave, right? You need to ride a wave. Web3 is a wave, ride the wave. And I did that, and I was disappointed in terms of, frankly, what I was able to get done in terms of like a product people wanted. But like the people who actually tried riding that wave, they all kind of failed, right? Web3 kind of flopped. And a lot of those companies, some of them raised absurd $6-10 million rounds, and some of them end up giving their money back to investors. Some of them end up pivoting to like AI or something unrelated to Web3, AI being the next wave. Eventually I was sort of like, well, if a company is like a 10-year bet, there's very little reward for starting a failed company, especially financially. Maybe you get to go to some cool events and some cool dinners, and you get to meet some cool people, and it can lead to different jobs down the line after your company fails. But like, a lot of people start companies because they want the glitz and glamour, and then they look back on the 4 or 5 years they spent on their failed company, and they maybe wish they'd done something else. So it became a question of like, what actually do I want to do with the next 5 to 10 years of my life? What will I look back on and be proud of, even if it doesn't work? And that led me back to games. In a weird way, I think the responsible adult thing is to make video games and stop fooling around with what's flashy. And that doesn't mean that there aren't interesting things happening with AI or crypto. I keep my toe in those worlds, and I keep listening to what people are building in those worlds, and I do some angel investing and stuff. And I'm not going to say Elsewhere will never be a crypto game again, although it's pretty unlikely. And like I mentioned, there's some ways we could use generative AI that are additive to the creative experience, but I've come to the conclusion that's just the icing on the cake. And a great game is an act of love by its creators. And ultimately, when Silicon Valley tries to build games that are built around one of these inflections, what they're trying to do is short-circuit the hard work of creativity and find a shortcut, a get-rich-quick way of like, well, since AI is happening, we can just make a crappy game, but build it with AI and it will succeed. And I think the people doing that are going to be really disappointed with how they spent those years of their life. And no disrespect to them. If it works, I wish everyone success, but I think they'll be disappointed.
This is your second company.
Yeah.
What do you want to do similarly as the last? What did you learn that you want to do completely differently this time
That's a
around?
great question. So similarly, work very hard. Like you have to be willing to put in lots of hours in the early stages of a company. Similarly, find people who are really multi-talented early on. Find people who have a generalist mindset, who think like almost like founders themselves. That's really important. Similarly, create artificial deadlines, create goals. Super early on, like especially before a company has a minimally viable product built, sometimes you don't have customers, no one's bothering you. How long should it take to build your MVP? And Roger and I just we put the date 6 weeks out. We said we're going to have it done by then. Works great. And similarly with GDC, that was an artificial deadline, and we're about to set a new one. In terms of what's different, let's try and take ourselves a little less seriously. And Human Interest, being a 401k company that's trusted people's retirement money, had to be a bit of a serious thing. But I think that company culture almost became like very into itself as a real business. I think we almost tried to be more corporate than we needed to be because we wanted to be perceived as bigger than we are. And I think we at Elsewhere should just embrace the fact we're a tiny team, that we're still nobodies in the games industry, and because what we're building an entertainment product, we can also be silly and self-deprecating and swear and tell stupid jokes in our marketing, as we do around the office, and just be ourselves, which is great. A lot of human interest is salespeople and operations people and account managers, and that's required to keep the business growing and running. But for Elsewhere, I really want to keep the team small. I believe, last number I heard, is human interest is around 700 people.
Wow.
And putting aside what it takes to pay 700 salaries, culturally, I don't think it's very fun to work in a 700-person company, right? No one knows who anyone is. Ultimately, at that size, an individual's incentives will be disaligned from the company itself. Where if you're the 700th employee at a company, I'm sure you care about the mission to some extent, but you also have a plan about how this job is going to help you with your career to help you get the job you want. Whereas everyone at Elsewhere is doing the job that they ultimately want. And that just results in a very different kind of work.
Yeah.
And obviously we will want to get really successful and the team will have to get bigger, but I hope it's never that big.
How is this new Paul different or the same as the last Paul?
I think this new Paul is a lot more humble. I feel like, 4 years ago when I left Human Interest, I thought I knew a lot more than I did. I had much stronger conviction about how the world works. I don't actually feel like I know how the world works. I think a lot of what I hear around me is wrong. I hear a lot of people talk about things with a great deal of certainty, especially in the startup world, about how things are going to play out. And in the back of my mind, I often think that's probably not true. But that doesn't mean I know what is going to happen either. I feel a lot of skepticism. I definitely take myself a lot less seriously. I feel like a lot more grounded as myself. I spend a lot more of my time thinking about creativity rather than process. At Human Interest, I think most of what we had to do was follow the best practice, especially as CTO on the engineering side. You don't really want to be that innovative when you're building a financial system. You just want to follow the best practice for data security, the best practice for how to transfer money, how to represent a ledger in your database. Just learn the best practice and follow it. And I spend a lot more time now thinking, how can I be original? How can we be original in our marketing, in our gameplay? How can we do something no one else has done? So it's actually the exact opposite, because I still find myself looking at what other people have done, but before it was to copy it, and now it's to build off of it. It's okay, here's 5 indie games, here's what they did. What thing can we do that none of them tried, right? And that's actually kind of a polar opposite. I have a lot more warmth and respect for other people, but I also, in a weird way, care a lot less about what they think, which is a kind of an interesting juxtaposition as well.
Are you scared to fail because you had such a big success in your first company?
Oh man, I was.
Yeah, I remember that, Paul. And then what changed?
It was so paralyzing. I couldn't do anything because anything I thought about doing had to have a plausible story on how it could be bigger than Human Interest. The problem is if you only do things that from the outset seem like they can be billion-dollar ideas, you eliminate a lot of good ideas and you restrict yourself to the sort of things that everyone else is doing. In fact, I think a lot of the biggest successes we see in the startup world, their success is a surprise to the founders themselves. I basically said, what if Elsewhere fails, or what if it's a moderate success? What if I never achieve anything as big as Human Interest? Will I be happy? And I came to yes. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
I have great ambitions for Elsewhere. But I think this mindset is the most conducive to success, and also the most conducive to happiness, because otherwise I would be in a state of unhappiness up until the moment that I surpassed Human Interest. And that, if it does happen with Elsewhere, will take a lot of time.
Wow, I love that answer, because I do think there is more of an ease to who you are, and I'm sure it was really hard to leave a company that you worked on forever and became so successful too. So seeing you transform as a person is great to see.
Leaving Human Interest was not an easy choice at the time, but in hindsight was completely, and no disrespect that many people work there and love it there, and the leadership team is obviously doing very well, but it was the right decision for me and I don't regret it one bit.
Yeah.